You a Navy SEAL. That's what the general said right before he made the biggest mistake of his career. He thought she'd stay silent. He thought rank could overpower truth. But what happened next didn't just shake the base, it shook the system. Stay with us, because in the next few minutes, you'll witness the moment power met principle and regretted it instantly. Subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below, telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from all corners of the world. Let's get started. The heat over Camp Jefferson, Texas, shimmered like ghosts rising from the dust, turning the firing range into a mirage of sweat and silence. At the far end, 5 steel silhouettes stood waiting still, taunting. Staff Sergeant Savannah Creed, a woman whose eyes seemed carved from stone and storms, lay flat on her belly, cheek resting against the cold frame of her custom-built Mk-13 Mod 7 sniper rifle. Behind her stood 20 recruits barely old enough to shave, eyes full of bravado but hearts still untested. They whispered and smirked, voices dripping doubt. She says she's a SEAL, no way, not a woman. But Savannah didn't flinch. She hadn't flinched in Fallujah, nor in Helmand Province when her team was ambushed under a moonless sky. She didn't flinch the day they folded her brother's flag, or the morning she left her old life behind. That rifle wasn't just metal and scope, it was memory, burden, and redemption. Captain Monroe nodded once. Watch closely. This isn't just marksmanship. This is what mastery looks like. Savannah inhaled, held it. A heartbeat passed, then crack. The first target collapsed in a puff of dust. 4 more would follow. By the time Savannah Creed stood up and brushed the Texas dust off her uniform, the snickers behind her had faded into breathless silence. 5 rounds, 5 hits, all center mass, grouping so tight it could have been stitched by thread. The young men who doubted her just minutes before now stared as if they'd witnessed a ghost or worse, realized they'd just seen the truth. Savannah gave them nothing more than a short nod before stepping aside. No smirk, no swagger. She didn't need it. Her record, her scars, her silence, they spoke loud enough. But not everyone applauded. Watching from a distance, arms folded tightly across his broad chest, was Brigadier General Warren Blackthorne. At 58, he was every inch the old war dog, square-jawed, decorated, and bound to tradition like a Bible to a pulpit. Rumor had it he hadn't set foot on an active battlefield in 15 years, but his opinions, those still marched into every room before he did. He leaned toward Colonel Whitaker and muttered under his breath, "You telling me that's our lead instructor?" Whitaker didn't respond right away. He'd been around long enough to recognize the undercurrent in Blackthorne's tone. It wasn't curiosity, it was contempt. "Yes, sir," Whitaker finally replied. "Careful. Staff Sergeant Creed has increased our marksmanship scores across the board by 32% since she took over the SEAL prep module." Blackthorne snorted. "Is that so 32% from kids who couldn't tell the barrel from the buttstock? Impressive or convenient?" The general's gaze drifted back to Savannah, who was now correcting the trigger discipline of a lanky recruit fumbling with his weapon. "She wears that trident like she earned it," he muttered. "She did, sir," Whitaker said, more firmly this time. "Class 2988, 3rd woman to complete the pipeline. First to pass Hell Week without a medical pull." But Blackthorne's eyes had already narrowed. The next morning, Savannah was summoned to the admin building, a place she rarely set foot in unless paperwork demanded it. A young specialist met her at the entrance, nervous energy radiating from him. "Ma'am, General Blackthorne and Colonel Whitaker would like to see you. Office 3B. Savannah adjusted her cover. "This about the marksmanship module." He hesitated. They didn't say. When she stepped into the room, it was like walking into a court-martial without the benefit of a trial. Blackthorne sat behind the desk, elbows planted, fingers steepled. Colonel Whitaker stood off to the side, clearly uncomfortable. "At ease, Staff Sergeant," Blackthorne said, though there was no ease in the room to find. "Yes, sir," Savannah answered crisply. The general didn't bother with pleasantries. I've reviewed your file. Quite the story: combat deployments, SEAL qualification, sniper school, decorated career. His eyes lifted to meet hers, and for the first time, his voice dipped with cold purpose. But it seems your career has also been curated. Savannah said nothing. She'd heard this tune before, different verses, same chorus. Blackthorn leaned back in his chair. I've also reviewed the modifications you've made to our training protocols, off-book stress simulations, adjusted scoring rubrics, selective inclusion of recruits in advanced training without full chain of command clearance. With respect, sir, Savannah replied calmly. All changes were approved through Colonel Whitaker and the Training Oversight Board. Blackthorn smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Yes? Well, oversight can be overstepped. And frankly, I'm beginning to question whether this whole operation is more about performance or politics. Whitaker stirred. General, if I may. You may not. Blackthorn snapped. His attention returned to Savannah, who had not flinched once. Do you know what bothers me most about all this? He asked, voice lowering. It's not the program, not even the fact that we're throwing tradition out the window to chase media darlings and optics. He stood. It's you. Savannah's spine straightened reflex, not fear. You walk in here with medals and scars and think that makes you bulletproof, Blackthorn said, now circling the desk. But I've seen soldiers like you before, elevated for show, tolerated for headlines. You're not the future of this military. Staff Sergeant, you're its distraction. Then he said it low, venom-laced. You a Navy SEAL. That's a fairy tale they feed the press. Silence, thick as storm clouds. Savannah looked him square in the eye. Sir, she said, voice like calm steel. With respect, I didn't become a SEAL to be believed. I became one to do the job better than anyone else. Blackthorn's eyes flared. He stepped close, too close. And in that moment, something dangerous flickered behind his smile. The trap was set. She just hadn't seen the spring snap yet. The morning sun beat down on Camp Jefferson's parade ground like judgment. Rows upon rows of recruits stood at rigid attention, their freshly pressed uniforms already damp with sweat. Formal inspection day, the kind of day where careers were made or quietly buried. Staff Sergeant Savannah Creed stood near the front of Alpha Company, back straight, boots polished to a mirror shine. Her squad was tight, focused. Even Private Elliott, the youngest, hadn't blinked once in 6 minutes. They knew what was coming. And so did she. Across the field, General Warren Blackthorn emerged like a thundercloud in a dress uniform, medals gleaming, expression unreadable. 2 aides followed in silence, like shadows trained to obey. Colonel Whitaker trailed behind, his jaw tense, eyes scanning the formation. As Blackthorn's boots echoed against the concrete, Savannah could feel the change in air pressure. Every soldier felt it, the way tension rolls in before a storm. Blackthorn stopped suddenly right in front of Private Reese, one of Savannah's sharpest shooters. The name of the general barked. Private First Class Reese, sir. Assignment. Advanced Marksmanship Unit under Staff Sergeant Creed, sir. Blackthorn raised an eyebrow. The Creed cohort. You proud to be trained by a legacy experiment? Reese blinked. Sir. Blackthorn stepped closer. I asked you a question. Soldier. Savannah felt it in her gut, the setup, the trap. She took 1 step forward, voice calm. Sir, permission to clarify. Blackthorn's head turned slowly, his expression a mix of satisfaction and something darker. You just couldn't help yourself, could you? He said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Sir, I'm simply ensuring my soldier isn't caught in a miscommunication. Out of line, Blackthorn snapped, return to position. Savannah didn't move. The parade ground grew quieter. Even the birds seemed to sense something unnatural. I said return to position. Staff Sergeant, Blackthorn growled. This time, Savannah looked him directly in the eye. Sir, I respectfully request to clarify that Private Reese scored a 38 out of 40 on basic and holds the highest nightfire score in the battalion. His place in the unit is earned, not assigned for optics." There was a pause. A long one. Then it happened. Without warning, Blackthorn stepped forward and grabbed Savannah by the hair, yanking her head backward with a force that made her knees nearly buckle. The suddenness of it sent a ripple through the entire formation. A stunned silence blanketed the field. Time froze. He leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper, teeth clenched. "You want to challenge me? You think this is your army now. You're just another headline waiting to fade." The grip on her scalp burned, but Savannah didn't move, didn't wince. Instead, she smiled. Not a grin, not defiance. It was the quiet smile of someone who'd seen death blink first, the smile of someone who'd once crawled through a minefield to drag a dying teammate back under fire. The kind of smile that meant you picked the wrong target. Savannah's voice came slow, clear. Every soldier on that parade ground heard it. "Sir, you can tear out my hair, you can ruin my career, but you will not break what we've built on this field." Then, a pause. "And you will never touch another one of my soldiers again, not while I'm breathing." Blackthorn's face turned a dangerous shade of red. He opened his mouth, but he never got the chance to speak, because from the fourth row, Sergeant First Class Darius Hale, a mountain of a man with 3 tours in Iraq, stepped silently out of formation. Then another, and another. Within 10 seconds, 24 soldiers had stepped forward, forming a line behind Savannah, wordless, unyielding. Blackthorn let go. Slowly. He looked at the wall of uniforms standing against him. His jaw worked as if trying to summon words. But there were none. Savannah straightened her collar, not a strand of pride out of place. Colonel Whitaker stepped forward, voice even. "Sir, I believe this inspection is over." Blackthorn didn't answer. He turned, boots crunching as he walked away faster than he'd arrived. He had walked onto that field thinking it was his. He left realizing it never was. By the time the last formation was dismissed, word had already traveled faster than any formal report could. General Blackthorn had laid hands on a staff sergeant on a parade ground during inspection. And that staff sergeant hadn't just stood her ground. She'd ignited something that neither rank nor tradition could silence. Savannah Creed walked back to the barracks in a strange silence, not the stillness of fear. No, it was something heavier. The quiet that comes when adrenaline fades and the cost begins to take shape. Inside, the room buzzed. 3 instructors and a command aide were already waiting. One handed her a folded piece of paper summons to Colonel Whitaker's office. Another offered a tight nod of respect, the kind that said we saw everything. 5 minutes later, Savannah stood in a windowless room across from Colonel Whitaker, Lieutenant Colonel Rourke from Legal, and most unexpectedly Colonel Eli Donovan, former Delta operator and current ethics officer for the base. Whitaker spoke first. "General Blackthorn has filed an official charge of insubordination against you." Savannah didn't blink. I assumed as much. "He claims you disobeyed a direct order and disrupted formal inspection." Rourke added, "He also omitted the part where he physically assaulted you. But fortunately, we have 3 independent video recordings, including drone cam footage from above the parade ground." Donovan folded his arms. "Not to mention the 24 soldiers who stepped out of formation behind you. That's the part that's rattling command. This wasn't a personal standoff. It became something else." Savannah stayed silent. She knew. Donovan leaned forward. "What I need to know is what's this really about?" Savannah exhaled slowly. "You want the truth?" "Yes," Donovan said quietly, "all of it." She reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a worn flash drive, placed it on the table. "I accessed restricted mission files last month, files connected to a 2004 operation in Fallujah led by then Colonel Blackthorn, and one other 1991 classified incident in southern Iraq. That one, my father was involved." Whitaker's eyes narrowed. "Your father?" Commander Thomas Creed, he died by suicide in 2002. After years of nightmares, the VA called it PTSD, but the truth was buried with redacted reports and a wall of silence. She continued, voice even but heavy. The mission went sideways, ambushed. Intel was leaked. His team walked into a trap. Half of them didn't make it out. The internal investigation disappeared, and Blackthorn was promoted. Rourke stared. Are you saying he sold them out? I'm saying the pattern fits, Savannah replied. He did the same in Fallujah, overruled intel, ordered a strike that killed civilians, then pinned it on a dead lieutenant, and he kept rising. Whitaker ran a hand over his face. So when he grabbed you when you stood your ground, it wasn't just personal. It was historic. It was legacy, Savannah said. It was what he thought he killed coming back to haunt him. The room went silent. Then Donovan stood. We'll open a formal inquiry. We'll submit everything to the Inspector General in the Pentagon. You'll need to testify. I will. Rourke hesitated. Savannah, you understand the cost, don't you? He has allies, connections. This will not go down clean. She nodded. Neither did Fallujah. Neither did al-Basra. But someone has to tell the truth, even if no one wants to hear it. That night, Savannah sat alone outside the barracks, watching the stars flicker faintly over the horizon. Her fingers brushed over the insignia on her chest, the trident, earned through blood and silence. And for the first time in years, she thought about her father not with pain, but with purpose. He had spoken the truth in whispers. She would speak it aloud. Inside the barracks, Private Reese and 2 other recruits had gathered quietly around her bunk. They didn't say anything, just sat there, like soldiers who had chosen their leader not because of rank, but because of conviction. At 0400 the next morning, Savannah woke to a note slid under her door. We believe you. Whatever comes next, we've got your 6. Signed by over 50 names. Most of them she hadn't trained personally. Some she hadn't even met. She folded the paper, tucked it in her breast pocket, and began preparing for war. Not with weapons, but with truth. 3 days later, Savannah Creed found herself standing in front of the most unexpected door on base, the office of the Inspector General. Inside was a sterile conference room, cold and fluorescent lit, with a single long table at its center. Across from her sat 3 officials in pressed uniforms, 2 of them generals from out of state, and 1 civilian representative from the Department of Defense. It wasn't a court, but it felt like one. A female colonel spoke first. Staff Sergeant Creed, thank you for agreeing to meet under such short notice. We've reviewed the videos, the medical reports, the sworn testimonies, and your access logs to the archive system. Savannah nodded once. Yes, ma'am. The man beside her, Colonel Donovan, the ethics officer, added. She came forward with the intel willingly. Didn't try to hide it. We know, the colonel said, then leaned forward. What we'd like to ask now is, would you be willing to help us go deeper? Savannah blinked. Deeper. The civilian answered, We've been tracking misconduct patterns for years, but it's rare we get a witness who's not just a bystander but part of the system, someone decorated, respected, who knows how the game is played. They weren't just investigating General Blackthorn anymore. They were going after everything. There's a Senate oversight hearing next quarter, the civilian continued. We want you to testify. Off the record for now. We're assembling a task force to review gender bias and internal corruption in military advancement. You'd be the key figure. Savannah swallowed. You want me to go public? The general across the table answered, Only if you're willing. But make no mistake, Staff Sergeant, what happened on that parade ground, it's not just a moment. It's a turning point. Soldiers from around the country are talking about it. You've become a symbol, whether you wanted to or not. She sat back in her chair, eyes burning from days without real sleep. And for the first time, she let herself imagine it not as a martyr, not as a rebel, but as a soldier doing what she was trained to do. Take the shot when it matters. All right, Savannah said. I'll testify, but on one condition. "What's that?" the colonel asked. "I'm not here to tear down the system. I'm here to make sure it lives up to the values we all swore to defend. I'll speak. But this isn't about revenge. It's about restoring trust for everyone wearing the uniform. Male, female, all of us." The civilian nodded slowly, spoken like a seal. Later that afternoon, as she exited the building, Savannah found Private Reese waiting outside the gates. He didn't say anything at first, just walked beside her in silence. Finally, he asked, "Ma'am, is it true they're going to put you in front of the Pentagon?" She smiled faintly, something like that. He glanced at her, then looked away. "Some of us were talking last night, the ones who saw what happened and those who didn't but wish they had. We want to train harder, smarter, like you taught us." She stopped walking, looked at him. "You're not here to be like me," she said. "You're here to be better. I fight so that you won't have to." Reese nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, ma'am." Back in her quarters, Savannah removed her uniform blouse and hung it with care. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, at the darkening bruise still faint on the back of her neck. The evidence of that moment, the hand that had tried to humiliate her in front of hundreds. But it was fading now, and something else was rising in its place. Resolve, not just for justice, but for every soldier who had ever been told they weren't enough, for every voice silenced by rank, for every file redacted until the truth bled away. This wasn't just her opportunity. It was the system's chance to prove it could still be worth believing in. She sat down, opened her laptop, and began drafting her statement to Congress. The next few weeks passed in a blur of briefings, statements, and long nights filled with silence. Savannah Creed had spent her entire career operating in shadows, low profile, high pressure, maximum impact. But this was a new kind of battlefield. No rifles, no targets, just words and the weight they carried. She'd been trained to take lives. Now she was trying to change them. The first time they called her a symbol, it made her uncomfortable. She wasn't chasing headlines or hashtags. She wasn't looking for vindication. All she had ever wanted since her very first day at Buddits was to earn her place. Now, somehow, her place had turned into a platform. And that scared her more than bullets ever did. One night, after a classified debrief with Pentagon officials, Savannah sat alone in the chapel on base. The lights were dim, the stained glass cast long, fractured shadows across the pews. She hadn't prayed in years, not since her father's suicide. But something about the quiet, about the way the world felt like it was holding its breath, made her whisper, "You taught me to fight, Dad, but not how to carry this." There was no answer, no divine comfort, just the echo of her own breathing, steady and slow. But in that silence, a memory stirred. She was 14 again, standing on the porch of a rundown house in North Carolina, watching her father oil his rifle. He hadn't said much that day, but as he handed her the cloth and told her to clean the bolt assembly, he'd murmured, "You don't measure a warrior by how many enemies they've defeated, but by how many they protected when it counted." Back then, she hadn't understood what he meant. Now she lived it. The day of her testimony. Savannah walked into a secure government facility dressed not in camouflage, but in her Navy service dress uniform. Every ribbon on her chest, every insignia was earned. As she passed down the marble corridor, young staffers and senior officials turned to look. Some nodded, some just stared. She wasn't a myth anymore. She was real and undeniable. The hearing room was quiet as she took her seat. Across from her sat senators, military leaders, and policymakers. Behind her sat officers who had flown in from bases across the country. Some she knew, most she didn't. At the very back of the gallery, she spotted Private Reese, out of uniform, sitting with Private Selena Grant, one of the few women in the sniper program. They weren't here on orders. They were here to witness. A senator cleared his throat. "Staff Sergeant Creed, thank you for your service. You've been asked here today not just because of your actions, but because of your insight. We want to understand what went wrong and how we fix it." Savannah didn't open a folder, didn't read from a script. She looked each person in the eye as she spoke. In the military, we talk about discipline, structure, obedience, and those are necessary. But we forget to talk about integrity, about courage that doesn't come with medals. She took a breath. General Blackthorne didn't just grab my hair. He grabbed hold of a legacy that tells women we don't belong. That says strength looks one way, talks one way, wears one face. A pause. I didn't step out of line that day. I stepped into it. I stood between a soldier and a system that forgot who it's supposed to serve. The room was silent. She continued, voice steady. "I'm not asking for revenge. I'm asking for accountability. For my father, for Private Grant, for every soldier who gave everything to a system that sometimes forgot to give back." She finished and sat still. No applause, no handshakes, just a silence that said something had shifted, and no one could pretend otherwise. That night, back at base, Savannah stood in the training yard under the floodlights. A new batch of recruits was watching her as she corrected a grip, adjusted a stance, nodded at a clean trigger pull. She wasn't just instructing anymore. She was building, not just shooters, not just soldiers, leaders. And maybe, for the first time since she wore the trident, she felt peace, not because the battle was over, but because she had finally become what her father couldn't, a warrior who protected others not just in combat, but in truth. The orders came down one crisp autumn morning. General Warren Blackthorne, after a 35-year military career, was being placed on administrative retirement, pending further investigation. His name, once synonymous with discipline and tradition, was now attached to a list of ethics violations, misconduct reports, and a growing archive of testimonies from soldiers, male and female, who had remained silent until now. And at the center of it all stood Staff Sergeant Savannah Creed. But she didn't gloat. She didn't cheer. She just stood on the edge of the field, watching a convoy disappear into the horizon, taking an arrow with it. Behind her, soldiers were gathering, quietly, purposefully. They weren't here to celebrate someone's fall. They were here for something bigger. The wind picked up, rustling the flags as the change of command ceremony began. A new General Brigadier General, Alyssa Monroe, a combat veteran known for her fierce fairness, took the podium. "I do not come here to replace tradition," General Monroe said, her voice firm but warm. "I come here to remind us that tradition only matters when it serves the values we defend: integrity, courage, unity." She looked directly at Savannah. "And sometimes, the bravest act of service isn't what you do on the battlefield, but what you do when no one else dares to speak." There was no cheering, just silence, the kind that meant everyone was listening. After the ceremony, Savannah walked the perimeter of the parade ground, her boots kicking up dust in the fading light. She'd stood in this spot dozens of times, but today, it felt different. Not because of a title, but because of what it meant. A group of recruits approached. At their lead was Private Selena Grant, now wearing the insignia of squad leader. "Staff Sergeant," Selena said, her voice steady. "Permission to speak freely." Savannah smiled. "Granted." Selena stepped forward and took a deep breath. "I used to think I had to act like the guys to be taken seriously. Talk like them, shoot like them, disappear like them. But then I saw you stand there, not yelling, not breaking, just standing. And I realized you don't have to become someone else to belong. You just have to be willing to be seen." Savannah felt the words hit her like a quiet wave. She nodded once. "Thank you, Private." "No, ma'am," Selena said, standing straighter. "Thank you." That night, Savannah sat alone on the rooftop of the barracks, the stars sprawling overhead like they always had, quiet, ancient, watching. She pulled out a folded letter from her jacket. The ink had faded slightly, the edges frayed. It was her father's handwriting. "You'll face battles no one will see. Some you'll win, some will break you. But if you can still look in the mirror and know you didn't become what you fought, You've already won." Tears slid silently down her cheek. She whispered, "I see you, Dad, and I think maybe you'd be proud of me now." Below, floodlights lit up the field where young soldiers trained, her unit, her future. And then, the door behind her creaked open. Colonel Donovan stepped out, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "I figured you'd be up here," he said, handing one to her. "News from D.C. came in." She arched a brow. "You're being reassigned," he said. Her stomach dropped for a second. Then he added with a smirk, "To the Tactical Ethics Advisory Unit, national level. You'll help shape training doctrine, write policy, speak at West Point. They want the soldier who stood her ground not just to lead, but to teach others how." Savannah blinked. "That's not a promotion." "No," Donovan said. "It's a legacy." As morning broke, Savannah Creed packed her gear slowly, deliberately, not out of nostalgia, but out of reverence. Not for where she had been, but for who she had become. She walked once more through the barracks, past the training yard, past the range where it all began. And as she stepped onto the tarmac to board the plane toward her next mission, not with a rifle, but with her voice, she looked back just once. Dozens of soldiers stood at attention, saluting her silently. She returned the gesture, then turned forward. Because some wars aren't fought with bullets. Some are fought with conviction. And Savannah Creed. She had already won the battle that mattered most. The one for her soul. The lesson: courage isn't always found on a battlefield. Sometimes it's found in the quiet decision to say no when everyone else says stay silent. It's found in the refusal to betray your integrity even when the cost is your career, your comfort, or your place in line. Savannah reminded us that rank doesn't define leadership, character does, and that one act of moral courage can ripple across an entire system long after the noise has faded. If Savannah's story stirred something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss a story that reminds us what courage truly looks like.